I met Jessica at a time in my life when I was looking for someone, to make it feel complete. I was 39, successful in my career but constantly haunted by the thought that my personal life was one long string of failed attempts. My previous relationships always seemed to burn bright and then fizzle out, leaving behind only disappointment and a nagging sense of emptiness. Jessica was supposed to be different. From the moment we met, she was magnetic. She had this energy, a confidence that made her stand out in any room. Her beauty was striking, effortless really, but it wasn't just her looks that drew me in. She had a way of making me feel like the center of the universe when she looked at me, when she laughed at my jokes, when she hung on my every word. That was her gift, I suppose. Jessica could make anyone feel special, but at the time, I believed it was just me. We fell hard and fast. Within weeks, we were inseparable. We moved in together almost immediately, fueled by that intoxicating mix of passion and infatuation. My friends teased me about rushing in, but I ignored them. After all, I'd been waiting for someone like her my entire life. Or so I thought. Jessica always seemed a bit larger than life, the kind of person who thrived on attention and admiration. At first, it was one of the things I loved most about her. She was vibrant, social, and always knew how to light up a room. But there was a darker side to that charisma, something I didn't see at the time or maybe refused to see. Looking back, I can pinpoint moments when things didn't quite add up. The late nights out that she brushed off as girl time. The mysterious texts she'd quickly hide. The expensive items that seemed to appear out of nowhere. I chalked it up to her independence, her worldliness, her wealthy family. I told myself that it didn't matter because she chose me, because we were happy. But now, as I sit here recounting it all, I can see how blind I was. How willingly I ignored the signs. It wasn't love. It was a game to her. A beautifully orchestrated illusion that I was too desperate to question. And by the time I realized it, it was already too late. The first few months with Jessica felt like a dream I didn't want to wake up from. She was everything I'd ever imagined in a partner. Beautiful, confident, adventurous. We traveled to places I'd only seen in glossy brochures. The Maldives, Bali, Santorini. She had a way of making life feel larger than it really was, as if every moment with her was something extraordinary. I showered her with gifts, jewelry, designer bags, even a few gadgets she mentioned in passing. She didn't just appreciate them. She expected them. At the time, I didn't think much of it. She came from a wealthy family, after all, and she wasn't shy about saying how her parents had spoiled her growing up. But it wasn't just me giving. Jessica was generous too, in her own way. She made me feel seen, needed, adored. Whenever I'd walk into the room, her smile would light up as if I'd just made her day. It felt good to be someone's world for a change, to believe that I was the one she couldn't live without. We settled into our life together quickly, and it was easy, effortless even. She moved into my apartment, turning it into something that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Suddenly, my once minimalist living room was decorated with plush throws, scented candles, and ornate mirrors. Jessica had a knack for turning the ordinary into something dazzling. I let her take the lead, happy to bask in the glow of what I thought was our shared happiness. But then, small things started to nag at me. She always seemed to be on her phone, the screen tilted away from my view. She'd laugh at messages but wouldn't share what they said. Packages would arrive. Expensive clothes, luxury perfumes, and when I asked about them, she'd wave it off, saying they were gifts from friends or family. Her work as a cosmetologist often meant she had late-night appointments or trips to fancy hotels for private clients. I didn't question it. Why would I? She was driven, ambitious, and she promised me it was all part of building her career. Besides, I was happy, or I thought I was. Looking back, I wonder if I ignored those little inconsistencies because I didn't want to lose what we had. The passion, the laughter, the way she made me feel like the luckiest man alive. I clung to it, afraid of what might happen if I asked too many questions. Jessica had a way of keeping things exciting, always pulling me into some new adventure. One weekend, she'd surprise me with plans for a road trip. The next, she'd suggest redecorating the bedroom. There was never a dull moment, and I told myself that this was what love was supposed to feel like, electric, consuming, unpredictable. What I didn't realize then was that unpredictability had another side to it, one I wasn't prepared to face. The first real crack in the illusion came from my mother. Jessica and I had been together for nearly 6 months when I decided it was time to introduce her to my family. I was nervous but optimistic. Jessica was charming and effortlessly likable. Surely, she'd win them over the same way she had with me. The dinner was at my parents' house, a small gathering with just the 3 of us and my younger sister. Jessica arrived in her usual glamorous style, wearing a dress that turned heads and carrying a bottle of expensive wine that she claimed was a favorite of hers. She floated through the evening, smiling, laughing, and holding court as she regaled my family with stories about her work and travels. First, I thought it went well. My sister seemed to like her, and my father, always a quiet man, even managed a few approving nods. But my mother, she was less enthusiastic. It wasn't obvious at first, just a slight coolness in her tone, a hesitation before responding to Jessica's stories. By the end of the night, though, I could feel the tension. As Jessica excused herself to take a call, my mother took the opportunity to pull me aside. "She's something," she said, her voice carefully measured. I frowned, sensing where this was going. "Something good, I hope?" She hesitated, glancing toward the hallway, where Jessica was chatting animatedly on her phone. "Alex, don't get me wrong. She's beautiful, and she clearly makes you happy. But something about her feels off." "Off," I repeated, defensive. "What's that supposed to mean?" My mother sighed, lowering her voice. "She's charming, sure, but there's a certain calculation to her, like she's putting on a show. I just want you to be careful. People like her," she trailed off, shaking her head, "they don't always have the best intentions." I bristled at her words. Jessica hadn't done anything to deserve such suspicion. "You're wrong about her," I said firmly. "Jessica loves me. She's just nervous about making a good impression." My mother gave me a long, searching look before finally nodding. "I hope you're right," she said quietly. "I really do." When Jessica returned, she asked what we'd been talking about, her tone light but with an edge of curiosity. I brushed it off, saying my mother was just telling me about a neighbor's dog or something equally mundane. Jessica smiled, but her eyes lingered on me a second too long, as if trying to read the truth in my expression. That night, as we drove home, I felt a knot of unease settle in my chest. My mother's words replayed in my mind, clashing with my own convictions. Jessica had done nothing to warrant such mistrust. Had she? I pushed the thought away, unwilling to let doubt creep in. My mother didn't understand Jessica like I did. She couldn't see the way Jessica lit up my world, the way she made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. But deep down, a small part of me wondered if my mother saw something I didn't. After my mother's warning, I couldn't shake the faint unease that lingered in the back of my mind. For a while, I managed to ignore it, chalking it up to her overprotectiveness. But as time went on, Jessica's behavior began to feed those doubts. It started with her phone. She was always on it, texting, scrolling, giggling at something unseen. When I'd ask what was so funny, she'd give vague answers like, "Oh, just a silly meme from a friend," or "Work chat, nothing interesting." She never handed me her phone or shared what she was laughing about, which felt odd, but I told myself I was being paranoid. Then came the gifts. Jessica was always receiving things. Flowers, designer handbags, expensive perfumes. When I asked where they were from, she'd wave me off with an airy laugh. "Just a client who appreciates me," she'd say, or, "My parents sent it. You know how generous they are." First, I believed her. Her family was wealthy, and she often talked about their generosity. But when I suggested writing them a thank you card for one particularly extravagant gift, a diamond bracelet, she seemed startled. "Oh, that's not necessary," she said quickly. "They wouldn't expect that." The explanation was reasonable enough, but the way she said it, the tightness in her voice, the way she avoided my eyes, made me uneasy. Her work as a cosmetologist also started to raise questions. Jessica often had late-night appointments, claiming her exclusive clientele required privacy. She'd come home smelling of expensive cologne, which she explained as part of working in close quarters with clients. Once, I asked if I could come along, maybe meet some of her clients or see her workspace. She laughed, almost nervously. "You'd be bored out of your mind," she said. "Besides, it's not exactly glamorous, just waxing and facials. Trust me, you're better off not seeing the behind the scenes." Her tone was light, but something about the way she dismissed me made my stomach churn. Then there was the trip to Bali. We had planned it together, a romantic getaway for just the two of us. But 2 days before we were supposed to leave, Jessica announced she couldn't go. "One of my clients booked me for a last-minute trip," she said, feigning disappointment. "They're paying triple my usual rate, Alex. I can't turn that down." I tried not to be upset. After all, she was working to build her career, and this seemed like a big opportunity. But when I asked if she could reschedule, she was adamant that it wasn't possible. "These kinds of chances don't come around often," she said. "You understand, don't you?" I told myself I did. But when she came back from the trip with a tan and a new Louis Vuitton bag, I couldn't help but feel the first stirrings of doubt. Was it all in my head? Or was there something Jessica wasn't telling me? The doubts started small, almost imperceptible. But like a seed planted in fertile soil, they grew, slowly, steadily, until they began to overshadow everything else. Jessica's birthday was always an elaborate affair. She loved being the center of attention, and this year was no different. She invited a close-knit group of her friends to a private lounge she'd rented for the evening, complete with champagne, music, and expensive hors d'oeuvres. I'd spent weeks planning her gift, a limited edition handbag she'd been eyeing. The smile she gave me when she unwrapped it was everything I'd hoped for, and for a moment, I let myself believe that things between us were perfect. But that illusion didn't last. The night was in full swing when one of her friends, a bubbly brunette named Chelsea, clinked her glass and called for everyone's attention. "Let's all toast to Jess for turning the big 2-0, she said with a grin, raising her glass high. The room erupted in cheers, but I froze. 2-0? I laughed nervously, thinking it must have been a mistake. "Chelsea?" I said. "Don't you mean 26? Jessica's expression shifted, just for a split second. It was a flash of something I couldn't quite place. Panic? Embarrassment? Whatever it was, she quickly masked it with a dazzling smile. "Oh, Alex," she said, looping her arm around mine. "Chelsea's just joking." Chelsea, however, wasn't laughing. She looked confused. "Joking? You just told me yesterday how excited you were to leave your teens behind." The room grew quiet, the tension palpable. I felt my heart pounding in my chest as Jessica let out a forced laugh. "Chelsea's had a little too much to drink," she said breezily, steering the conversation to a safer topic. But I couldn't let it go. Later, when the party had thinned out, I pulled Jessica aside. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "How old are you, really?" Her eyes darted away, and for the first time since I'd met her, she seemed unsure of herself. "Alex, it's not a big deal," she said finally. "I told you I was 25 because I didn't think you'd want to date someone younger."
I'm 20. Okay, 20.
I stared at her, struggling to process what she was saying. 20? That meant she'd lied about her age the entire time we'd been together. "Why would you lie about something like that?" I asked, my voice rising despite my effort to stay composed. She shrugged, her tone defensive. "Because guys like you don't date girls my age. I had to prove I was mature enough for you, and I figured once you got to know me, it wouldn't matter." "It matters, Jess," I said, shaking my head. "It matters that you didn't trust me enough to tell the truth." She rolled her eyes, brushing me off as if I were overreacting. "Oh, come on. It's not like I lied about something important. It's just a number." Her words stung, but I let it go. I told myself it wasn't worth ruining the night over, that maybe I was making a bigger deal out of it than it was. After all, what was a few years in the grand scheme of things? But the seed of doubt that had already been planted began to grow, its roots spreading deeper with every passing moment. The night should have ended there, but it didn't. Another offhand comment from one of her friends during the party revealed another truth. Jess, are you still doing those massages on the side? Jessica's head snapped around, her expression sharp. Shut up, Tasha, she said with a forced laugh. I blinked, taken aback. Massages? I asked, confused. I thought you were a cosmetologist. Jessica hesitated, her eyes narrowing at Tasha before turning to me. I do both, she said smoothly, her voice dripping with practiced confidence. Sometimes I take massage clients when things are slow. It's all part of the beauty industry. Her explanation seemed plausible enough, but the way she said it, quick, rehearsed, left a sour taste in my mouth. I didn't push further that night, but something in me had shifted. Jessica wasn't just keeping secrets. She was crafting a life that I was only allowed to see parts of, and I was starting to realize just how much of her world I didn't know. After Jessica's birthday, the cracks in our relationship became impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the revelation about her age or the mention of massages. It was the growing realization that I didn't really know the woman I'd been living with. Jessica seemed unbothered by the events of the party, brushing them off like they were minor inconveniences. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the life we'd built was resting on a foundation of lies. Her phone became a focal point of my suspicions. She was glued to it more than ever, always texting or scrolling, her screen angled away from my line of sight. When I asked about it, she'd shrug and say it was work or a group chat with her friends. Why don't you let me see? I asked one night, trying to sound casual. Her reaction was immediate and telling. Alex, what's with the sudden paranoia? She said, her voice tinged with annoyance. I'm allowed to have some privacy. It wasn't just the phone. Her work as a cosmetologist became increasingly vague. She'd leave for appointments at odd hours, coming home smelling like expensive cologne. When I asked why her clients didn't go to a salon, she'd roll her eyes. They're high profile, she'd say. They prefer discretion. Packages kept arriving, designer clothes, luxury accessories, high-end gadgets. When I questioned her about them, she stuck to the same story. Gifts from grateful clients or her parents. One night, she came home with a brand new handbag that I knew hadn't come from me. Another client? I asked, trying to mask the edge in my voice. She grinned, twirling the bag for effect. Yep, they love me. I forced a smile, but something inside me snapped. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I decided to dig deeper. Jessica had a small room in the apartment she used as her workspace. She called it her studio, and it was off-limits to me. At first, I respected her boundary. Everyone needs their space, right? But as my suspicions grew, I couldn't help but wonder what she was hiding. One evening, while she was out, I stood outside the door to the studio, debating whether to go in. My heart pounded as I turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room was immaculate, almost sterile. A massage table sat in the center, flanked by neatly arranged oils, towels, and candles. On the surface, it all seemed normal until I noticed the camera in the corner. It wasn't pointed at the door or the desk. It was aimed squarely at the massage table. Cold dread washed over me as I examined the setup. This wasn't just for relaxation or beauty treatments. This was something else entirely. I backed out of the room, my mind racing. I needed proof, something concrete to confirm what I already suspected. The next day, while Jessica was at an appointment, I installed a hidden camera in the studio. I told myself I was doing it for clarity, for closure. Deep down, I was terrified of what I might find. For the next week, I avoided Jessica as much as possible. I made excuses to stay late at work or go out with friends, anything to avoid looking her in the eye. Every night, I reviewed the footage from the camera, and every night, my worst fears were confirmed. It wasn't massages she was giving. The men who came into our home weren't clients looking for beauty treatments. They didn't even bother with the pretense. As soon as they walked in, Jessica's demeanor changed. The flirting, the intimate touches. It all happened so casually, so brazenly, as if this was just another day at the office for her. Each time, I felt my stomach churn with anger and disgust. I watched, unable to look away, as she betrayed me over and over again. By the end of the week, I had hours of footage, undeniable proof of who Jessica really was. And that's when I made my decision. By the time I finished reviewing the footage, I felt like I didn't even know the woman I'd been living with. The Jessica I had fallen in love with, the one who laughed at my jokes, planned our adventures, and made me feel like I was the only man in the world, was a lie. Couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, smiling and carefree as she welcomed those men into our home. Our home. The betrayal burned in my chest, an ache that wouldn't go away no matter how many excuses I tried to make for her in my head. By morning, my anger had crystallized into something cold and sharp. I knew what I had to do. I spent the day compiling the footage, editing together the most damning clips into a short video. My hands trembled as I worked, but I didn't stop. This wasn't about revenge, I told myself. This was about exposing the truth, about making sure everyone saw Jessica for who she really was. When the video was ready, I sent it out to everyone in her circle. Her friends, her family, her wealthy clients, even her parents. I didn't accompany it with an explanation or a message. The footage spoke for itself. I sat back and waited, a mixture of dread and grim satisfaction swirling in my gut. The fallout was swift and brutal. My phone buzzed relentlessly with calls and messages, most of them from people who had seen the video. Her friends were horrified, her parents livid. Jessica's mother left me a voicemail, her voice shaking with shame and disbelief as she apologized on her daughter's behalf. "You did the right thing, Alex," she said before hanging up. She needed to be stopped. Even the men in the footage weren't spared. A few of them contacted me, furious at being exposed, but I didn't care. They knew what they were doing when they walked through that door. Jessica, however, was conspicuously silent. I expected her to come storming through the door that evening, ready to confront me, to scream and cry and demand an explanation. But when she came home, it was quiet. Too quiet. She walked in like nothing had happened, setting her bag down on the counter and pouring herself a glass of wine. "Hey," she said, her tone light. "How was your day?" I stared at her, stunned by her audacity. Could she really not know what I'd done? Or was this some kind of game? I played along, pretending everything was normal. "Fine," I said curtly. She didn't seem to notice my cold tone. Or maybe she didn't care. The calm didn't last long. It was only a matter of hours before her phone started buzzing nonstop. I watched as she picked it up, her brow furrowing as she read through the messages. Her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to horror. She turned to me, her face pale. "Alex," she said, her voice shaking. "What the hell is this?" I didn't say anything at first, letting her words hang in the air. I wanted to see her squirm, to watch her scramble for an explanation she couldn't possibly give. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, almost detached. "It's the truth, Jessica," I said. "Something you've been avoiding for far too long." Her jaw dropped, and for the first time she looked genuinely scared. You knew?" she stammered. "I knew," I said, folding my arms. "I've known for a while now. I've seen everything." Her fear quickly turned to anger. "You had no right to invade my privacy like that," she snapped, her voice rising. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've ruined my life." I felt a bitter laugh escape my throat. "I've ruined your life? Jessica, you ruined us the moment you brought those men into our home. The moment you lied to my face over and over again." She stared at me, her anger flickering like a dying flame. "Alex, please," she said, her voice softening. "I can explain." I raised a hand, cutting her off. "Don't bother. I've seen enough." For the first time since I'd met her, Jessica didn't have a response. She sank onto the couch, her face buried in her hands, as the reality of her situation finally seemed to sink in. But I didn't feel sorry for her. Not even a little. Jessica stayed on the couch, her head in her hands, as her phone continued to buzz and ping. Each notification seemed to make her flinch. She didn't say anything for what felt like an eternity, and I didn't offer any comfort. I just stood there, arms crossed, watching as she unraveled. Finally, she lifted her head, her mascara smudged from tears she hadn't wiped away. "Alex," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you do this to me?" Her question hit me like a slap, not because it hurt, but because of its sheer audacity. "Why would I do this to you?" I repeated, my voice cold. "You're really going to play the victim here? After everything you've done?" She blinked at me, her lips trembling. "I know I've made mistakes," she said, her tone pleading. "But this? Sending that video to everyone? That's cruel. Cruel." I stepped closer, my anger simmering just below the surface. "You want to talk about cruelty? How about lying to me for months? Bringing strangers into our home? Betraying me in the most personal, disgusting way imaginable? Jessica, don't you dare stand there and act like you're the injured party." Her expression shifted, fear mingled with anger. "You don't understand," she said, standing up and pacing the room. "It wasn't like that. I didn't mean for it to happen." "Then explain it to me," I said, my voice sharp. "Help me understand why you thought it was okay to turn our home into your personal brothel." She flinched at the word, but I didn't care. I wanted her to feel every ounce of the disgust and betrayal that had been eating away at me. "It started as a way to make extra money," she said after a long pause, her voice hesitant. "Some of my clients, they offered more than just payment for massages. I didn't think it would turn into this. And yet it did," I said, cutting her off. "You didn't stop, Jessica. You didn't think about how this would affect me, us. You just kept going, kept lying." Her tears started again, streaming down her face as she pleaded with me. "I didn't know how to stop," she said, her voice cracking. "I was in over my head. I didn't want to hurt you, Alex. I swear." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You didn't want to hurt me? Jessica, every single decision you made was a betrayal. Every lie, every secret. And now you're only sorry because you got caught." She sank back onto the couch, sobbing into her hands. For a moment, I almost felt a twinge of pity. But then I remembered the videos, the texts, the evidence of her deceit, and any shred of sympathy I might have felt evaporated. Her phone buzzed again, and she picked it up, her expression twisting as she read the screen. "My parents," she said, her voice shaking. They don't want to talk to me anymore." "Good," I said bluntly. "Maybe they'll help you understand the consequences of your actions." She looked at me, her eyes wide and desperate. "Alex, please," she said, reaching for my hand. "I'll stop. I'll cut off all contact with them, with everyone. Just don't leave me." I pulled my hand away, the weight of her words hanging in the air. "It's too late, Jessica," I said, my voice steady. "You've already destroyed everything we had. There's nothing left to save." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't stay to comfort her. I turned and walked to the bedroom, locking the door behind me. That night, as I lay awake, her muffled cries echoing through the apartment, I realized that this was only the beginning of the fallout. Jessica might have been the one who shattered our relationship, but I was the one holding the shards, and I was ready to cut her out of my life for good. The morning after Jessica's breakdown, the apartment felt unnaturally quiet. I woke up to find her sitting at the kitchen table, her phone face down in front of her and a cold cup of coffee in her hands. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes bloodshot, but there was a strange calm about her, as if she'd made some kind of decision. "I need to talk to you," she said when she noticed me. Her voice was quiet, drained of its usual bravado. I leaned against the counter, keeping my distance. "Talk," I said, my tone flat. She swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she set the cup down. I'm sorry," she began. "I know that doesn't mean much after everything, but I am. I never wanted to hurt you, Alex." I said nothing, letting the silence stretch. Jessica continued, her voice cracking. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me. You still are. And I ruined it. I know that now." Her words might have moved me once, but now they felt hollow. I crossed my arms, my expression unmoving. "If you really thought I was the best thing in your life, you wouldn't have done this," I said. You wouldn't have lied to my face and betrayed me over and over again. Her tears started anew, but this time I felt nothing. I didn't know how to stop, she said, her voice shaking. It started small, just a few clients offering me extra money. I thought I could handle it, but then it snowballed. I was scared, Alex. Scared of losing you. Scared of you finding out. I let out a bitter laugh. So you kept going, hoping I'd never notice? That I'd never see what was right under my nose? She looked down at her hands, unable to meet my gaze. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm begging you. Please, don't give up on me. I'll do anything to make this right. For a moment, her words hung in the air, and I felt a pang of something, sadness, maybe, regret for what could have been. But then the anger surged back, sharper than ever. Make this right, I repeated, shaking my head. Jessica, there's no fixing this. You didn't just break my trust, you shattered it. And the worst part is you didn't stop. Even when you knew it was wrong, even when you saw how much I loved you, you kept going. Her tears fell harder, her shoulders shaking. I know, she said, her voice cracking. I know I don't deserve you, Alex. But please let me try. Let me prove that I can change. I stared at her, my chest tight with a mix of fury and heartbreak. You've had plenty of chances to prove yourself, I said. And every time you chose yourself over us. I'm done giving you chances, Jessica. I'm done. She sobbed harder, but I didn't stay to watch. I turned and left the apartment, slamming the door behind me. I drove aimlessly for hours, trying to make sense of the chaos my life had become. Part of me wanted to believe she was sorry, that she truly regretted what she'd done. But another part of me, the louder part, knew that her tears weren't about losing me. They were about losing control, losing the comfortable life she'd built on lies. When I finally returned home, Jessica was gone. A hastily scribbled note lay on the counter, her handwriting shaky and uneven. I'm staying with a friend for now. I know you need space. Please don't hate me, Jess. I stared at the note for a long time, my emotions swirling. I didn't hate her, not entirely. But I didn't love her anymore either. She had made her choices, and now I had to make mine. The days following Jessica's departure were some of the hardest I'd ever experienced. The apartment felt hollow, every corner haunted by memories of her. Her laughter, her touch, the way she used to fill the space with her energy. Now it was just me, the silence, and the weight of everything I'd discovered. At first, I couldn't bring myself to throw anything of hers away. Her clothes still hung in the closet. Her favorite coffee mug sat on the counter, and her perfume lingered in the air. I told myself I'd get to it eventually, but deep down, I knew it wasn't just procrastination. Some part of me still clung to the hope that this was all a bad dream and that I'd wake up to find her beside me, the Jessica I thought I knew. But then the messages started. Friends, family, even people I didn't know, reached out to offer their thoughts on the video. Most of them were sympathetic, though some seemed more interested in the drama than my well-being. Her friends called her actions unforgivable. Her parents sent me a formal letter apologizing for her behavior, though it felt more like damage control than genuine remorse. Every buzz of my phone was a reminder of the humiliation, of how public her betrayal had become. I hated that people knew, that my private heartbreak had turned into a spectacle for others to dissect and judge. The anger came next, started as a slow burn, an ember smoldering in my chest. Every time I thought about her lies, about the men she'd brought into our home, the ember grew hotter. I replayed the footage in my mind, torturing myself with images I couldn't unsee. How could she smile at me, kiss me, hold me, and then turn around and do that? I wanted answers. I wanted closure. But more than anything, I wanted her to feel the pain she'd caused me. One night, after too many drinks, I called her. She didn't answer, so I left a voicemail. My voice was calm, but every word dripped with venom. I hope you're happy, Jessica. I hope it was worth it, because you've lost everything now. Not just me, but your friends, your family, your reputation. You made your bed. Now lie in it. The next day, I regretted the call, but I didn't apologize. She hadn't deserved my kindness before, and she didn't deserve it now. As the days turned into weeks, the grief began to settle in. The anger didn't fade. It just became quieter, more familiar, like an old wound that throbbed when the weather changed. I missed her, or at least the version of her I'd fallen in love with. I thought about all the red flags I'd ignored, all the excuses I'd made for her. The late nights, the mysterious packages, the lies about her job. How could I have been so blind? So desperate to hold on to her that I ignored what was right in front of me? I started going to therapy, hoping to make sense of it all. My therapist helped me see that the betrayal wasn't just about her infidelity. It was about the deception, the way she had manipulated me into questioning my own instincts. She didn't just break your trust, my therapist said during one session. She broke the foundation of your relationship. And now you're left to rebuild. Not with her, but for yourself. Those words stuck with me. Rebuild for myself. It was a slow process. I started clearing out her things, boxing them up and dropping them off at the apartment where she was staying. Each item I let go of felt like a small victory, a step toward reclaiming my space and my life. But even as I moved forward, a part of me remained tethered to the past, to the love I'd thought we had. Jessica's fall from grace was swift and unforgiving. The video I'd sent out had made its way into circles I hadn't even considered. Her extended family, her professional contacts, and even the so-called clients who had given her those expensive gifts. Her web of deceit was laid bare for everyone to see, and it wasn't long before the consequences caught up with her. Her friends, the ones who had clinked glasses and toasted to her at her birthday, were the first to abandon her. A few sent me messages expressing their disgust, some even apologizing for not seeing through her lies sooner. She fooled all of us, one wrote. I can't believe I trusted her. Jessica's parents, who had always been supportive, at least on the surface, were devastated. Her mother called me once, her voice trembling with shame as she tried to apologize for Jessica's behavior. I don't know what we did wrong, she said, her voice heavy. She wasn't raised this way, Alex. Please believe me. I didn't know what to say. Her mother sounded sincere, but a part of me couldn't help but wonder if they had enabled Jessica's sense of entitlement, her belief that she could get away with anything. Her father, however, was less sympathetic. I heard through mutual contacts that he had cut Jessica off financially, furious at the disgrace she'd brought to their family name. Losing his support must have hit her hard, especially since she'd relied on him for so much. Even the men from the video faced their own reckoning. One of them, a prominent businessman, sent me a furious email threatening legal action. You had no right to share that footage, he wrote. Do you have any idea what you've done to my reputation? I didn't bother responding. If he thought his reputation was ruined, he should have considered that before stepping into my home and into bed with my wife. Jessica's professional life was in shambles too. Word spread quickly, and her client base evaporated overnight. People didn't want to be associated with someone whose name was now synonymous with scandal. I later learned that some of her former clients had sent emails demanding refunds or leaving scathing reviews online. But the worst part, the part that left her truly broken, was the silence from her closest allies. Jessica thrived on attention, on being admired and envied. Now she was the subject of whispers and pointed fingers. The friends who had once rallied around her didn't answer her calls or return her messages. For weeks, I heard nothing from Jessica. No calls, no texts, no attempts to explain or apologize. I thought she'd finally accepted the reality of what she'd done and decided to disappear from my life for good. But then, one evening, I got an email. It was from Jessica. A long, rambling message filled with apologies and pleas for forgiveness. Alex, she wrote, I know I've hurt you in ways I can never undo. I was selfish and stupid, and I don't expect you to ever trust me again. But please, I'm begging you, don't shut me out completely. I need you. I don't know how to fix this, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes if you'll give me the chance. Her words felt empty, almost mechanical. I didn't reply. I had moved beyond anger at this point, but that didn't mean I was ready to forgive her, or even hear her out. Jessica had made her choices, and now she was facing the consequences. Still, As I sat there staring at her email, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. Not for her, but for what we'd had or what I thought we'd had. The life we'd built together was gone, reduced to ashes by her actions. I closed my laptop and went to bed, determined not to let her words drag me back into the mess she'd created. For weeks after Jessica's email, I kept my distance. I didn't respond, didn't acknowledge her attempts to contact me, and tried to focus on moving forward. But every time I thought about the damage she'd done, not just to me but to our life together, I felt the anger bubbling beneath the surface again. Ignoring her wasn't enough. I wanted to ensure she couldn't just rebuild her life and pretend none of this ever happened. She had taken so much from me. My trust, my peace of mind, my belief in the future we'd planned together. And now I was determined to take something from her. Jessica's online presence had always been one of her greatest strengths. She had a sizable following, built on carefully curated photos and posts that showcased her glamorous lifestyle. It was a facade, of course, but one that had worked well for her. Until now, using an account I'd created under a fake name, I started targeting her social media pages. At first, it was small things, reporting her posts as inappropriate, flagging her accounts for spam. But then I took it a step further. I used bots to inflate her follower count, flooding her accounts with fake profiles that liked her posts and left generic comments. To anyone looking from the outside, it might have seemed like her popularity was growing. But social media platforms are smarter than they look. They have systems to detect unusual activity, and within days, her accounts were flagged and eventually banned for violating terms of service. Her carefully constructed online world vanished overnight. The fallout was immediate. Without her online presence, Jessica had no way to connect with potential clients or the few friends she had left. She tried creating new accounts, but the damage was done. Her reputation had been tarnished beyond repair, and even her name became a liability. I should have felt guilty. I should have felt some sense of remorse for what I'd done. But I didn't. Watching her crumble, knowing she was finally feeling even a fraction of the humiliation and helplessness she'd caused me, was oddly satisfying. Then one day she showed up at my door. I hadn't seen her in weeks, and the sight of her took me by surprise. She looked different, smaller somehow, like the weight of everything had finally caught up to her. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes wrinkled, and there was no trace of the confident, glamorous woman I'd once loved. "Alex," she said softly, her voice cracking. "Please, can we talk?" I hesitated, torn between slamming the door in her face and hearing her out. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and let her in. She stood in the middle of the living room, looking around like she barely recognized the place. "I know you hate me," she began, her hands trembling, "and you have every right to. But I need you to know how sorry I am. I've lost everything, my friends, my family, my career, and it's all my fault. I know that." I crossed my arms, keeping my distance. "What do you want, Jessica?" She looked at me, her eyes filling with tears. "I want a chance to make things right," she said. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'll do anything. Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. Just tell me how to fix this." Her words hung in the air, but I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to believe her, to think she could change. But the other part of me, the part that still felt the sting of her betrayal, knew better. "Jessica," I said finally, my voice cold, "you can't fix this. Some things can't be undone. You need to move on, and so do I." Her shoulders sagged, and for a moment, she looked like she might argue. But then she nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "I understand," she said quietly. As she walked toward the door, she paused, turning back to look at me one last time. "I'm sorry, Alex," she whispered, "for everything." And then she was gone. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of relief. I didn't know if it was closure or just exhaustion, but I knew one thing for certain. I was done with Jessica. For a few days after Jessica's visit, I waited for the other shoe to drop. It seemed impossible that she'd simply walk away and accept what had happened, especially given how determined she had seemed to fix things. And sure enough, she didn't. It started with messages. Long, rambling texts filled with apologies and promises. "I've started therapy," one read. "My therapist says I need to work on myself, but I also want to work on us. Please, Alex, give me a chance." I ignored her. When the texts didn't work, she tried calling. I blocked her number. Then the emails started. Each one was more desperate than the last, filled with stories of how she was struggling, how her family had cut her off completely, how she had no one left. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she wrote in one email, "but I'm begging you to at least hear me out. I can't do this alone." I deleted the emails without responding. The final straw came a week later, when she showed up at my work. I was in the middle of a meeting when one of my coworkers came to get me, looking concerned. "There's someone in the lobby asking for you," they said. "She seems upset." I knew it was Jessica before I even saw her. Sure enough, there she was, sitting in the corner of the lobby with her head in her hands. She looked up as I approached, her eyes red and swollen. "Alex," she said, her voice breaking, "please, I just need 5 minutes." I didn't want to cause a scene, so I led her outside. The moment we were alone, she launched into a tirade of apologies. "I've lost everything," she said, tears streaming down her face. "My friends, my family, my clients, they've all abandoned me. I don't even know who I am anymore. You're the only person who ever really loved me. Alex, please, don't give up on me." Her words might have moved me once, but now they just felt empty. I stared at her, my arms crossed, my expression unreadable. "You didn't just hurt me, Jessica," I said finally. "You destroyed us. And now you're dealing with the consequences of your actions. That's not my responsibility." She shook her head, sobbing harder. "I know I screwed up, but I can change, Alex. I'm already trying. I just need you to believe in me. Just this once." Her desperation was palpable, but I couldn't let myself fall for it. She'd made her choices, and now she had to live with them. "Jessica," I said, my voice firm, "you need to stop. Stop coming to my work. Stop sending me messages. Stop trying to fix something that's already broken. This is over. Do you understand me? It's over." For a moment, she just stared at me, her expression a mix of disbelief and devastation. Then finally she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "I understand." I watched as she walked away, her shoulders slumped, her steps slow and unsteady. It should have felt like a victory, like closure. But as I stood there watching her leave, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt tired. After Jessica's last desperate attempt to reconcile, I expected things to finally quiet down. And for a while they did. She stopped calling, stopped showing up unannounced, and her emails trickled to a halt. But even in her absence, she lingered. Not physically, but in the memories, the doubts, and the gnawing sense of what might have been. I spent countless nights replaying everything in my head, wondering where it all went wrong. Had I ignored the red flags for too long? Was I to blame for not noticing sooner? For not confronting her before things spiraled out of control? Therapy helped, but it didn't give me all the answers I wanted. My therapist reminded me that the responsibility for Jessica's actions was hers alone. But it was hard to let go of the idea that I had failed somehow, that I hadn't been enough to make her happy, to keep her faithful. Then, one evening, I got a letter from her. Not an email or a text, but an actual handwritten letter. The envelope was simple, the handwriting familiar, and the sight of it filled me with equal parts dread and curiosity. I debated throwing it away without reading it, but something stopped me. Maybe it was morbid curiosity. Maybe it was the small part of me that still wanted closure. Inside, the letter was long and heartfelt. She apologized again, but this time, her words felt different, less desperate, more reflective. "Alex," she wrote, "I know I've lost you, and I know I can never undo the pain I caused, but I need you to know that I never stopped loving you. I was selfish and reckless, and I let my insecurities ruin the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know that I'm trying to change. Not for you, but for myself." The letter ended with a simple promise. "I won't bother you again. I just hope one day you can look back at the good times we had and know they were real for me, even if I ruined them in the end. I sat with the letter for a long time, my emotions a tangled mess. Part of me wanted to believe her, to think that maybe she really was trying to change. But the larger part of me, the part that had been burned too many times, knew better. That night, I made my decision. I didn't write back. I didn't call or reach out in any way. Instead, I put the letter in a drawer and closed it, both literally and figuratively. Jessica was my past. She had taught me hard lessons about love, trust, and boundaries, and while those lessons had left scars, they also left me wiser. It was time to let her go. For good. It's strange how life has a way of moving on, even when you feel stuck in place. After everything with Jessica, there were days when I thought I'd never feel normal again. Days when I questioned if I'd ever be able to trust someone, to open myself up to love again. But time has a way of dulling even the sharpest edges. The apartment, once filled with memories of her, slowly became mine again. I replaced the things she'd chosen, the mirrors, the candles, the designer trinkets, with things that reflected me, not us. The process was cathartic, like reclaiming pieces of myself I'd forgotten. Therapy helped me see the relationship for what it truly was. I realized I had been so desperate to feel loved, to build a life with someone, that I ignored all the warning signs. Jessica's lies, her manipulative tendencies, her need for attention. Those were all there from the beginning. I just chose not to see them. That was a hard truth to accept, but it was also freeing. It wasn't about blaming myself for her actions. It was about understanding my own role in letting things get as far as they did. I also learned to let go of the anger. For a while it was my fuel, pushing me to expose her, to make her pay. But holding on to that anger only kept me tethered to her, and I didn't want her to have that power over me anymore. In the end, Jessica's betrayal taught me what I deserved, and what I would never tolerate again. It's been months now, and life feels lighter. I've reconnected with old friends, thrown myself into hobbies I'd let fall by the wayside, and even started dating again. It's tentative, cautious, but it's a start. When I think about Jessica now, it's with a strange mix of emotions. There's sadness, of course, mourning the relationship I thought we had, the future I thought we were building. But there's also gratitude. She taught me hard lessons I wouldn't have learned otherwise. If I could give advice to anyone going through something similar, it would be this: trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, don't dismiss it. And don't let fear of being alone keep you in a relationship that's built on lies. Jessica was my greatest heartbreak, but she was also my greatest teacher. And now I'm finally ready to move on.